everyone, this is Jennifer again for Breaking Bio. I'm with Kayla Fratt. She is the Communications and Outreach Coordinator at Working Dogs for Conservation, which is a really cool organization. They actually train all sorts of dogs for conservation. So it's things like scat detection, detecting invasive species, and lots of cool things like that. So Kayla, could you explain what Working Dogs for Conservation does and then what your role is within the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. So Working Dogs for Conservation, basically what we do is we start out by looking for really high energy, high drive, ball crazy rescue dogs. For the most part, we do have some dogs that come from career changes. So we've got a dog who was destined to be a Green Beret, but then has a shoulder injury. We've got a dog who's supposed to be Border Patrol, but then was too scared of strangers.
Oh no.
Not very useful if you're supposed to be patrolling the border. We've got a couple dogs who are supposed to be guide dogs, but were like way too high energy and, would like knock old people over.
Oh no.
Also not great if you're supposed to be helping them. But again, most of our dogs are rescue dogs. So that's where we start. We look for these dogs that really need a job. And then we're looking for dogs that are really, really obsessed with balls or tug or whatever it is. So, we've all been around that dog that, it's just like every 30 seconds that dog is bringing you a ball. Some of them bark and they're obnoxious to be totally honest. And then basically what we start doing is we teach them, hey, if you find this thing that we're looking for, then you get your ball. And we start really, really easy. We usually will teach them with like a neutral scent first. So that might be something like hair gel or like birch essential oil or something where we can get them used to the idea of searching for something, but it's not necessarily something they're going to run into out in the world. And the reason we do that is, if we taught them to find like, I don't know, pine cones or something as their first training scent.
Oh
and
no.
They're hired to go find like Wolverine scat or something. Your dog would be finding a pine cone every 2 seconds. And you would never get anywhere to find the Wolverine scat. So we start with something neutral and we start really, really easy. So like when I'm training my dog Barley on a new scent, I'll literally have the scent in one hand and the ball in the other. I put the ball behind my back and he's just got to put his nose on my hand. We do that 5 or 6 times. Then I put my other empty hand out. So then the ball is in my pocket or something. And he's just got to pick the right hand. We swap back and forth a couple times. And that's really where we start. It's that easy where, it's like he's got a 100% chance of getting it right if I'm holding it out to his nose. And then he's got a 50% chance of getting it right. And then we start introducing them to a variety of scents kind of within that category once they're actually being introduced to a real scent. So, for example, Barley is trained on red fox scat, and Barley's my dog who's right down there. He's trained on red fox scat. So we like to have them trained before they go out in the field for real life. We want them to be trained on 20 scents from between 5 and 10 different individuals. And the reason we want that is so that they don't think that they're supposed to be looking for Joe, the male fox who had Bunny for dinner last night, because we don't want them to get too specific in that scent profile. We want them to know that, hey, you're looking for all red foxes. So that's kind of like the nitty gritty of the training. But the point and the reason we do this is we're looking for non-invasive ways to sample, particularly endangered species. That's kind of how we started. So if you're looking at hormone levels in animals, I just finished reading a lovely book by Dr. Robert Sapolsky, and he's a baboon researcher in Kenya. And he tells these elaborate, long stories of stalking baboons with blow darts and trying to dart them but so that they didn't know, because he was trying to study stress hormones. And if the animal knows that he's being stalked and the animal knows he's been darted, then his body's going to be flooded with stress hormones. Kind of invalidates your data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Robert Sapolsky doesn't work with us or whatever, but it was funny. I was reading this book as I was working with these dogs where it was just like, he needed a dog to go collect fecal samples. And I don't know, maybe there's a reason that you can't do that with particularly his species or whatever. But that's kind of where we're starting is we're looking for a way to find more samples more quickly and do it in a low stress way for the animals so that we're not having to dart them, bring them home, take a blood sample, release them back to the wild. Or, if we're trying to find like snow leopard scat or something. I mean, they're so hard to find. It's such tough terrain. but the dogs are they're all-terrain vehicles. They're really hardy. They're very fast, and because of the way scent moves, our dogs are able to sometimes, depending on the right conditions, the dogs are going to be able to smell something even if it's decently far away from the trail, which is really, really helpful in these really cryptic species. So that's where we started, was pretty much exclusively working with these endangered species. Now, we also work with law enforcement and wildlife trafficking. So we've got dogs that search containers for things like shark fin, bear gallbladder. We've got dogs in Africa that work on anti-poaching units. So there's checking vehicles for ivory, guns, ammo, and they're also cross-trained to track. So if you find a snare or you find a site where an animal has been poached, the dogs can actually follow that backwards to find the poacher's camp and apprehend the poachers. And then kind of
awesome.
the third thing we do, and our fastest growing aspect of the organization right now, is we also will do invasive species detection. So invasive species are a huge problem. They're a really big man-made problem in much of the world. And a lot of invasive species are really, really hard to eradicate because we're only so good at finding them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we work both on the prevention and the eradication side with invasives. So when we do zebra mussel work, zebra mussels are these little teeny tiny mussels that are native to Ukraine, about the size of my pinky fingernail when they're full grown. Basically, one zebra mussel can produce up to 1 million microscopic veligers, which are their larvae.
Geez.
Yeah, so it doesn't take much of a mistake for an infestation to get really bad really quickly. Obviously, not many of those 100 or not many of those 1 million veligers are going to survive, but still, you get the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So our dogs are checking boats before they get launch permits to make sure they don't have zebra mussels on them. So that's prevention. And then on the eradication side, our dogs will work in tandem with human weed pulling teams. And the thing that's cool about the dogs is they're really good at finding, like, if a cow has trampled a plant and it's all screwy looking and, trampled and shredded, a human volunteer is less likely to be able to identify that quickly, especially, you're looking at a sea of thousands of plants. So of course we're going to miss something. So it's nice to have the dogs for backup. And the dogs are also really good at finding the little plants that just might not be growing up tall enough for a human inspector to see them. So that was a lot. I get really excited about this, and I have a hard time keeping myself short. What I actually get to do is, so I'm communications and outreach. So I get to go and do our school group presentations or talk at museums, or I was at a library last week. And interviews like this. And then I also do get to go out and do the field work as well. And then, some of the less sexy stuff, I run our social media and the website, but the fun, cool stuff that I get to do is I get to go out and do the demonstrations and the outreach and then some actual field work as well. So it's a pretty cool gig.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's awesome. It's so cool though, because it's just amazing how versatile dogs are and how we can utilize this one skill that they have, their amazing noses, and just use that to do so much, which is so cool because, yeah, I mean, the zebra mussels, I mean, if they're that small, it's so easy for us to miss that, just visually inspecting something. It's like, oh, no, there's nothing there, but, that person could have really terrible eyesight, or it just could be a little microscopic thing and we don't see it. And then boom, this has a huge zebra mussel problem. And it's, yeah, exactly. I can only imagine the huge amount of ecological damage that could do. So that's really, really cool. And then what's your background? What kind of inspired you to get into conservation?
So my dad is a conservation biologist. So I think I started really young. I was one of those kids who I stopped playing soccer in first grade because I would spend the whole time chasing grasshoppers and butterflies instead of playing soccer. And when I was 4 or 5, I would tell everyone that I wanted to be a lepidopterist when I grew up, and I was obsessed with butterflies. So this has been a thing that I don't know if I was born with it or if my dad just did a really good job when I was very, very young. And then I grew up in northern Wisconsin, and I grew up on kind of a retired dairy farm. So we didn't have much for livestock, but we had 40 acres. And my dad, as a conservation biologist, we're constantly planting trees and trying to do erosion mitigation. And he would get me maps of our property. And then I think he was honestly trying to get me out of his hair. But he was like, go find every bird nest on the property and map it.
Oh my gosh.
So I did that for a while when I was a kid. And then 4-H was a big part of my life as well. So I bred and showed chickens and rabbits and homing pigeons. And that's kind of how I got my start in animal training, was training homing pigeons.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Colorado College, which is in Colorado Springs, and I basically went there because, well, there was a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones was during my prospective student weekend, I met a guy there who ended up to be my advisor, Brian Linkhart, Dr. Brian Linkhart, who studies flammulated owls. Little teeny
Cool.
tiny owls. They're really, really adorable.
Ferocious, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're big moth eaters. Real mean.
They think they're ferocious. I've noticed with tiny owls, they think they're all big and tough and put on this big show. And yeah, they have a lot of attitude for such a tiny little fluff ball. It's pretty amazing.
They're fabulous. But I was like, well, okay, great. That's where I'm going to school. I want to do that. And then, so I majored in biology. And Colorado College has 2 different tracks within biology. So you can either do ecological ecology, evolution, and conservation or something. I don't know. They just changed the title. So what I majored in is probably not available anymore. But either that, or you can do molecular and cellular biology. So I did the ecology, evolution, and conservation track. So I got to do a ton of field work, which was really, really cool for my undergrad. Like we'd go mist netting, we'd go electroshocking for fish, learning all sorts of stuff about different sampling techniques. And then in the meantime, I also got a job as a dog walker. My freshman year of college. And that was because I didn't have work study and I needed a way to pay for food. And I started training the dogs that I was being paid to walk. With their owner's permission, I was just like, my life is going to be so much easier if I teach these dogs to walk nicely on leash and sit at crosswalks and all that sort of stuff. And I just caught the training bug really, really hard. So directly after college, I worked as a dog trainer for about 3 years full time. At a animal shelter, which was a really, really great way to get a ton of experience really, really quickly because, you're just working with so many animals so quickly. And a lot of the animals had pretty significant behavior concerns. That's why they ended up in the shelters because these people felt overwhelmed by them. And then my ex-boyfriend and I decided that we wanted to drive the Pan American Highway. So I quit my job at the animal shelter and started working as a freelance writer. And we drove all the way around the U.S. and then up to just north of Vancouver, British Columbia, and then all the way down through Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua, and then Costa Rica and Panama. And when we were in Costa Rica, I got a call from Working Dogs for Conservation letting me know that they were hiring. I had met with them previously when I was applying for a Fulbright grant to go study conservation detection dogs in New Zealand, which I ultimately did not get. But so they knew who I was. They knew I was really interested in conservation detection dogs. And I guess I said something right when I was interviewing them to help me write the grant. So when they were hiring, they actually just reached out to me before posting the job.
Wow.
Yeah, which was pretty cool. And here I am. So as far as actionable advice for people, I think what was most useful for me getting into this job was to have a wide variety of experience. I would not have gotten this job if I just was a really good dog trainer or just was a really good ecologist, but having the dog training and the ecology and the writing and communication skills, like I have a YouTube channel where I talk about dog training. So they were able, when they were deciding whether or not to hire me, they were able to see video of me doing demonstrations and talking to people. All of that was really, really helpful. So, actionable advice for people is make sure that you've got a really well-rounded skill set that makes you unique, because odds are you're not going to be the best dog trainer or the best ecologist or whatever who applies. Make sure you've got a wide variety of experience. That seems to help me. And then, I'm sure there was just an element of luck and, I was particularly charming the day that I met with our executive director or something, but showing that initiative and being patient. Like I didn't walk in asking for a job on day one. I walked in saying, hey, I'm writing this grant. Can I pick your brain about that? And I think that helped a lot. Because being in such a unique field, we get a lot of requests from people asking how they can get involved, whether or not we have openings. And I'm sure a lot of these people are really, really cool and really experienced, but like we don't have time to just read through resumes when we're not hiring. And like I can see now that I'm inside the organization how the way that I did it, even though it was accidental, stood out.
So Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, there's always such good advice to kind of say that. I mean, there's no harm in trying different things either and just exploring and kind of figuring out what your own little niche is within conservation because it's such a broad thing. I mean, people on the outside wouldn't necessarily think that dog training is something applicable to conservation, but it is because we have scat detection dogs, all those other things like illegal wildlife trade, like all that stuff. I mean, it's all tied in. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter what kind of skill it is. I mean,
Right.
there's got to be some way to incorporate it in. So
I
absolutely.
once applied for a job that I ended up not taking, but I was going to be working with vampire bats in Panama.
Oh
And
wow.
I basically sent the guy an email saying, I can drive stick, I speak Spanish, and I'm up to date on my rabies vaccine. And he was like, when can you start? Like, he didn't care about anything else. It was just like, I had those few skills. I mean, I had mist netted before, and it's funny the skills that you don't always think about. But like if you want to work internationally in conservation biology, learn how to drive stick and be able to speak another language.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to work with raptors, get good at rock climbing. I once emailed a goshawk biologist out in Idaho and said, I was just kind of getting information, and I mentioned that one of my hobbies is rock climbing, and he was like, oh my God, we had to get rid of our last intern because she was scared of heights, and a huge part of our job is climbing up trees to get
Oh
goshawks.
no.
So
Oh dear. Yeah.
yeah, like thinking through like what skills are actually going to be needed, and again, it might be something as seemingly simple as driving stick shift that makes you
Mm-hmm.
stand out.
Yeah, that's true because not all calls are automatic, and that's definitely a sticking
Especially not
point.
internationally. If you
Yeah,
want
exactly.
tropical biology, learn how to drive stick and be confident driving stick on tough roads, because that's like, again, it's one of those things where you can be the best field biologist in the world, but if you can't handle getting your car out to your field site, good luck.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
obviously, it's something you can learn.
I'm just imagining all the scenarios, getting stuck in mud, trying to, yeah, I mean, I've been in vehicles and we've gotten off the road and stuck in mud, and then you have to, like, well, okay, how do you get yourself out of this situation? What do you have
Yeah,
around you? Grasses, sticks. I mean, you just gotta make it work.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's a lot trickier if you like aren't actively thinking about it for sure. And then I was noticing on the website, I was doing a little research beforehand, and I noticed that the organization is mostly made up of women. How has that impacted your daily work routine, if anything? I mean, what's it like in an organization like that?
It's lovely. So we're a very independent team. So I actually don't notice the fact that we're so women heavy. So I think it's more, it's not necessarily intentional. We've kind of been joking that our next hire needs to be a man, but both dog training and conservation biology are pretty women heavy.
Mhm.
Dog training in particular, I would estimate, and I'm totally pulling this number out of thin air, but like probably 90% of dog trainers are women. And then conservation biologists also seem pretty female heavy, maybe not
Mhm.
quite as offset. But I think often our application pool when we're applying is very, very woman heavy.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know how it's changed anything as far as our workday, because so I'm on the road between about 6 months a year. Um,
Mhm.
and most of our field staff as well, they're on the road between kind of 4 and 8 months a year as well. So like this week, I actually haven't been into the office at all because no one else was going to be in the office. So I just worked from home. I was like, well, I'm not going to drive in if no one else is going to be around. So I don't know how it has impacted us because we don't see each other all that much. I mean, there's things
Mhm.
that are easier. Like last time I was at a conference, one of our co-founders and I were the two there, and I accidentally booked a room with a single king size bed. Um, uh, newbie mistake. Sorry to Meg and our, but that's something that probably would not have flown if there had been my partner had been male. But I think I probably would have been more careful when I was booking. If I don't know, I could have just made the same mistake.
Well,
Um,
thankfully, we didn't have to find out either way,
yeah, it
right?
worked out
So.
just fine. Yeah, so my job at the shelter as well, we had a team of 9 and there was only 2 men on that team as well. So I'm kind of used to working in really female heavy organizations, and talk to me in like 10 years if and when I've moved to a different organization and I'm now working in like a 50-50 organization, how it's different, because I've just always worked in female heavy organizations.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's true. Even with like my personal experience, I mean, I was a zookeeper for 4 years. I mean, and it was interesting because you could kind of see the shift like from like the older generation of zookeepers and the newer generation. It seemed to be more female heavy in terms of like the younger keepers and stuff. There's more keeper staff who are female. And then, I mean, but I think that also just varies depending on which institution you're working at too. But I mean, it was just really interesting because I mean, that's not something that a lot of people would necessarily think about and like realize that actually, there is a kind of a skew, at least nowadays. But, we'd have to look at the data from like ages and ages ago and then compare and, run all the stats and whatever. But yeah, it's definitely very interesting. And then for you, what are the greatest rewards of working with dogs? Like, because I mean, they're awesome coworkers.
They are. I mean, it's there's so many things about it that are so cool to me. So I just love getting to see these dogs that are, kind of traditionally tough dogs, really blossoming. Like that is just really cool to me. And as someone with a shelter background, it's really amazing to see these dogs who, frankly, would have been potentially euthanasia candidates in many shelters around the world. And a couple of them that, honestly, if they hadn't gotten to working dogs for conservation, it would have probably been the right choice, because of their histories. So that's not a plus, but it is really cool to see these dogs that, I think if they hadn't been given this opportunity, it would not have been unreasonable for them to be put down, because they had so many issues. So that's really cool. And then it's just like, it's so fun to watch my dog. He loves working and his tail just goes, and you can tell, if I went and pulled out my training bag right now, because I've got like a fanny pack that I wear when I'm training. He's right there, and like his pupils are dilated, and he's like sitting at attention, and like he's just so ready to go. And it's so cool to see that, especially, he's the same way when we do competitive agility, like the dog obstacle courses. Does that just as much. But for me, there's something so different about getting to do something that actually makes an impact. So like, we're not just rescuing that one dog, which is obviously really cool. And it's not that the dog just loves what he does, which is also really cool, but that's all coming together to do something that can like protect wildlife in wild places. And that just like sends shivers down my spines. It's just, it's so cool.
Right. Yeah. It's not just the one life you're saving. There's potentially a whole bunch, there's a ripple effect to it. And no, and for sure, I mean, to give those guys a second chance and a real purpose and have them unknowingly contribute to the betterment of the world. I mean, hey, I'll take it too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and especially even like, so my dog Barley, I don't think he would have been put down in any reasonable situation at a shelter. He's a fabulous dog. He has no issues. But the way he thrives off of this work anyway, I don't think we get to claim that we saved him. But I think he's so much happier doing this than he would have been just getting, 3 20-minute walks around the neighborhood a day. I think that kind of comes back to like a bigger animal welfare thing that I think a lot of times we take for granted with our pets, that we don't really give them as much as we should. But it's so cool to see him doing something he loves and knowing that it actually makes an impact. And like, he doesn't know. He doesn't care.
Yeah. He doesn't care.
He'd be just as happy finding every single pine cone in the forest. And I guess if there was a really rare species of pine or whatever, sure, we'll do it. But he doesn't know and he doesn't care. But it's cool to know that what he's doing and what he loves and what he's good at, and like, it's the other thing that like just gets me really, really jazzed. Obviously, most of this gets me really jazzed, but it's like he can access a fourth dimension, because I'll be watching him and he's sniffing, and you can see like his nose is like, it's prehensile, it's like moving from side to side, up to down, and he'll be running and he'll run into a column of scent and just turn on a dime and follow it. Like, I mean, it's like there was a lit up walking path. And, I walk the same places. I can't smell anything. And, if one of my neighbors is cooking bacon, I can tell, but I can't tell you which door necessarily without working really, really hard. And it's just incredible to watch him, like, there's actually, I think it's a Coca-Cola ad that shows a really cool visual representation of odor and how odor moves and how dogs catch it. And it's just so interesting to watch. I don't know as much about like odor dynamics and like volatile organic compounds and like all of these like the physics of scent, but watching him work it and problem solve, and it's just something that's so inherently inaccessible to us. And also knowing that, at least currently with how the current technology is, we have not been able to replicate a tool that's anywhere near as sophisticated as a dog's nose. And the ones that in lab tests are comparable to a dog's nose, they tend not to be waterproof. They tend to be heavy. They tend to be delicate. They're not actually all that practical for replacing a dog with for our style of work.
Right. And it wouldn't be as efficient because then we'd have to lug these things everywhere where a dog can just take it and go.
I'd so much rather unclip the leash. He's got his little safety harness on, his little bear bell, and like he can just go. I just have to carry water and a toy for him and he's waterproof. He doesn't care about mud. His joints never get gummed up. Like he doesn't need like little gentle puffs of air on his nose to keep the sensors clean. Like, he's much easier.
Yeah.
Although your instruments don't need walks on your off days. So that is a big thing for our handlers. Is most of our handlers live with at least one working dog. I'm actually unusual in that I only live with one. Some of our handlers live with up to 6.
Oh, wow.
And that's a combination of personal dogs and working dogs, but still 5-6 dogs in a home is a lot.
Yes, it's a lot.
And it means even after you come home after a long day of work, or you just spent 3 months in the field, you still have to walk the dog the next day.
Right. Because they'll look at you and be like, we have a schedule. This is the routine. What's up with this?
Yeah. Well, and if nothing else, they need a potty break, and you need to.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Like all that sort of stuff. So it is a lot, and even like I love how much I'm on the field for work right now. I haven't gotten sick of it yet. I love it. But it's a lot. Like 6 months on the road every year is a ton. I spend a lot of money on plant sitters. So yeah.
It's true. Yeah. And that's something that, people who are just starting may not realize that, it does require a lot of traveling, of movement, depending on what kind of job you have within conservation, for sure. I mean, there definitely is a lot of, stuff in the background that aside from like a supposedly glamorous job, there's a lot of other stuff too that you have to consider as well. And being constantly on the move can sometimes be a deal breaker for some people.
Yeah, I mean, well, and like I spent 3 days driving from Wisconsin to Arizona last month, across Kansas and Oklahoma. Like it wasn't fun. 3 days, like 30 hours straight of driving is just not fun.
Yeah.
And you get to, and we're like camping is really fun, but camping for work not always as fun, because we're not necessarily going to the most scenic places. We're going where the data needs to be collected. So I think that was something I had over romanticized when I first got hired. It was like, oh, I'm going to go all these beautiful places, and then my first assignment was to Yellowstone, so that kind of kept that mythology going for me. And then assignments since then have been in like random prairie dog towns in like northern Arizona, where you're just kind of like walking through the dust, avoiding the rattlesnakes. I mean, it's still cool and I still love it, but I think it's really easy to like, if you flip through our Instagram, you would be thinking that we're like always in like the most beautiful national wildlife refuges, and like it's always just like soft dawn light, but no, like a lot of it is rain and dust and mud and mosquitoes and
right, and snakes poking you in uncomfortable places when you're camping, and
and spending 3 days doing data analysis when you get home, up to like, I mean, a lot longer than that in many cases too. Luckily, I'm not one of the people who writes our papers, but we do also like write scientific papers for publication, and that's really important and it's really good work, but it's also a ton of work, and it's not as sexy as the field work.
No, not nearly. No, but it's just as important to get the information out there. Definitely.
Sorry, especially for such an unknown field.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, and just getting that data out there and saying, hey, this is a resource you can use. Here's the science to back it up in case there are any doubts,
Yeah,
other than the fact that
exactly.
dogs are awesome. So,
Yeah,
that goes
yeah.
without
I
saying,
mean,
but
a non-negligible part of what we do is so going back to when I was in Yellowstone, I think we ended up talking to over 700 people while I was there.
oh, wow.
Most of who stopped by we had like a little booth for aquatic invasive species education. And then we had a boat set up that we hid zebra mussels on so that we could do demos with the dogs. Most of those 700 people probably would not have stopped if we hadn't had the dogs. You know, obviously we're also using the dogs for zebra mussel work, and that's really important. But don't underestimate the ability and the utility of having dogs as ambassadors, because it's crazy
Mhm.
how excited people will get about dogs.
Right, absolutely. Because they're we're so used to seeing them, they're companion animals, and so I mean, personally for me, my first inclination is, ooh, can I go come and say hi to the dog, and can I pet the dog? That's most everyone's natural inclination. So, I mean, yeah, if it's a way to kind of hook them in and then kind of say, oh, actually, we're using these dogs and we're doing awesome work. Here's how this is being done. Then, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely for
exactly.
sure.
So
I mean, hey, that's part of the reason why when I came over to the booth at WC and I was like, oh, you had Barley with you. I was like, oh, can I meet your dog?
yeah, exactly.
Because naturally, as an animal person, that's what I gravitate towards first.
Yeah,
Is I see
yeah.
a critter. If I,
I mean, that's like he didn't serve a purpose at that booth other than just drawing people in. It's not
mm-hmm,
like we were doing demos. He wasn't really being useful. Um,
mm-hmm,
he was just being cute, but that matters.
mm-hmm, absolutely, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love that kind of stuff. I mean, it's so cool. There and they do so much important work. And I mean, you guys also, I mean, you're putting in the work just to train them, which is a lot of work and super
Yeah.
rewarding. So thank you for what you're doing. And yeah, so thanks to all our viewers. Go ahead and click the subscribe button underneath the video, and we will see you guys later. Thanks.